Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Samantha Varner. I am the head of professional services and product marketing here at Prosymmetry. Super excited to have you join our first webinar of the year. Um, Today, my colleague Lloyd Norman is going to be presenting on specifically the Tempest functionality, Tempest What If, our modeling and scenario planning feature, but also really talking about, how to understand the possibilities of what can happen with both your resource plan and also your financials that are tied to your projects, and how to, account for all of those different scenarios. So again, really excited to have you. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We are going to be taking questions at the end, and I want to make sure that we are addressing all of those. Of course, if we run out of time, we will individually reach out to you and make sure those questions get answered. This session is going to be recorded. You will receive a recording of the webinar tomorrow, maybe Monday. It all just depends on how quickly my team turns the recording around, if we're being honest. So with all of that said, we are going to have several webinars throughout Q1. So please visit prosymmetry.com/events to see what those webinars are, get registered for them. We will be adding more to our website over time. But really we're hosting a bunch of webinars. Hopefully you'll find them relevant during this Q1 here. So without further ado, Lloyd, I'm going to send it over to you so we can get today started.
Perfect. Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us here today. I'm going to be going over a few slides because I think it's important to provide some context as we talk about this. This whole concept of conquering resource and financial constraints. I've been in the business of doing that for quite some time. Today, we're going to be looking at that challenge sort of through the lens of what if analysis. Some really interesting automation capabilities that really provide helpful insights, but you've got to do it correctly. A few things to set up first, and so we'll start by that. I'm going to try to spend most of the time actually demonstrating some of these techniques. So we'll kind of burn through these slides, and then want to make sure that I've left at least 10 minutes for questions. So that's kind of where we're heading, and let's dive in. As I was putting this presentation together, I was reminiscing about the early days of my career. I was actually working on my master's degree in industrial engineering, and I had the opportunity to visit with Dr. Ed Deming, the same Ed Deming that the good folks at Scaled Agile Inc. and many around the world know from his manufacturing prowess, basically how he helped Japan rise from the ashes post-World War II. What an interesting and kind gentleman he was. And, I was a young buck and was in the process of bloviating about something that I probably shouldn't have been talking about. And he kind of calmed me down and he said, Lloyd, I want to remind you that you cannot inspect quality into a product. And it's a lesson that I've never forgotten. And I would submit to you that the same is true from a portfolio perspective. He went on to tell me you have to design quality into a product. You can't expect it in. And over the course of my life experience, I've really come to appreciate that. And the same is true from a portfolio perspective. What we're going to be talking about today in terms of what if planning is how do you design the maximum value flow through your portfolio? Whether your portfolio is, most of the clients that we have hundreds and hundreds of all different sizes throughout the globe, right? The vast majority of them, 90% plus, are mixed methodology delivery. So what I'm going to be talking about today is relevant to agile delivery, waterfall delivery, operational delivery. It doesn't matter if we're talking about audits or products or IT projects. The concepts that I talk about today are sort of universal and pervasive. And when it comes down to what if planning, the question is never, am I going to adapt? Because if you don't adapt, right, the odds are that the world is going to compel you to adapt one way or another. Either by closing your business or by putting some other constraint upon you that you just can't ignore. And the question is typically, how should I adapt? And that's what we want to focus on today. A typical scenario is when we've got to push new work into a portfolio that already has our teams running at 100%. How do we best do that? If we're getting that demand thrust upon us top down, especially from the C-suite, we've got to adapt, and let's do that intelligently. Now, when we're considering how we're going to be adjusting our portfolio, whether it's introducing new work or expanding existing work, or moving with some other constraint or guardrail that's changed on us, we have to look at our portfolio not just in terms of work, but we've got to look at all these various interrelated impacts. I would submit to you that the most important of these, by far, without question, is capacity. And by capacity, I mean how much availability do our skills have to do this work? And again, it doesn't matter if you're an organization with 50 people in your IT department or some of the larger ones that we have, where we're talking 50,000 plus employees throughout the whole enterprise. Coordinating the work, you have to consider the same kinds of things. What's the financial impact? How is this going to impact the CapEx commitments that perhaps we've made to the CFO? What other kind of guardrails do we have in place? Has the board challenged us to make sure that this year we need to have a certain percentage of our portfolio looking at growing the business as opposed to running the business? Are we tracking things through an OKR process? You don't have to be doing that, of course, but if we are, we need to make sure that we're aligning our people and not just our budgets, to those sorts of things. And then, of course, there's just hardcore interdependencies. Like, there's certain times that you can't begin to engage other technologies until fundamental enabling technology has been put in place. So when we're looking at introducing or changing our portfolio, we need an easy way to make sure that we're able to look at all these things simultaneously. And that's really where automation comes in. Because if you don't have good automation, it's incredibly difficult to balance all these constraints simultaneously. You'll make a decision, but more often than not, it's going to be suboptimal. So let's make sure that we're giving you the opportunity to maximize the flow of value through your portfolio given your constraints. The goal here, of course, is to make sure that we're credibly evaluating alternatives before we adapt the portfolio. What if analysis is a forward-looking process, right? I love this quote from McKinsey. Organizations that do this well, meaning specifically reallocating their talent in step with their strategic plans, they're twice as likely to outperform their peers. That came out in 2022. I think it's every bit as valid today in 2025. The other thing that I'll say and attempted to convey with this slide is that you better make sure that whatever you're doing is actually impacting the business, right? Those key performance metrics that people care about. What's this doing to the value and the outcomes that we're going to deliver, as well as the delivery kind of metrics that you're looking at traditionally from a project perspective. As I mentioned, this is really a forward-looking kind of an exercise. You need to be able to, from a what-if perspective, go through analysis with imperfect data with enough lead time to actually matter. As it turns out, what's in your pipeline out here is actually what affects your business. It's what you are becoming. It reminds me of something Russell M. Nelson said, a noted theologian and heart surgeon. He said, when speaking about people, he said, what we're becoming is more important than what we're doing. And I think that's true not only personally, certainly professionally, but organizationally as well. What's in our pipeline defines our future, right? So why don't we design what's in our pipeline and make sure that what's in our pipeline is always in the highest interest of the enterprise? You see, when teams are working down here, like on a calendar perspective in this 90-day calendar, they're doing detailed planning, right? If you've got agile teams working in tools like Jira or ADO, you are breaking your work down into stories and tasks. You're doing PI planning if you're working in a safe sort of a realm. Either way, it's detailed planning. Project teams, same way, right? Hopefully, your resources are well understood at this point, and you're assigning them at a detailed level. It's out here, really, where you start to drive the real value from what if planning. Because if you don't do this correctly, there's never any question your teams are going to be busy. If you go ask a team member, they're going to tell you, oh, no, we're always working on the highest priority thing, right? Our product manager is filling our backlog, it's prioritized, and we're just pulling from that backlog, and we are rocking and rolling as well they should be, right? What they don't know is that before their backlog ever got made, if this wasn't done correctly, those product managers had to push work, right? And someone had to determine what work was going to be pushed, right? And they may not have the visibility to that to see, oh, actually, we're pushing some really high priority things, but we can't get to them because compliance, audit, regulatory, legal, or whomever the constraining entity might be, doesn't have capacity and they're working on higher priority things, right? And so that's what we want to do out here. And that's why these rolling capacity forecasts are so critical to effective what if planning. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. It starts out here with really high level planning, shirt size estimates, if you will, and they get better over time, right? And so we'll talk about that. And this is really my last slide before we get into the product. I just want to make sure you understand that this whole concept that we're talking about here, sizing work, modeling, making sure that you're getting the best amount of flow for the least amount of risk. Once you size this, validating that with your executives that are in charge of portfolio delivery, right? Once they agree that, yep, this is the approach we should take, you've done good alternative analysis. And this, by the way, can happen at a project level, an epic level, a program level, or across the entire enterprise, right? The nice thing about the approach that I'm going to talk to you today about, it works for ad hoc queries where you've got work suddenly presented to your portfolio that you have to accommodate, or on a routine basis as well, because you need to be able to accommodate both kinds of changes to the organization. Once you've optimized what your organization should look like, by doing that in a risk-free environment, a virtual twin, if you of your portfolio, again, that's what if modeling we're going to be talking about today, then you align your roadmap, right? You take your production roadmap and you align it to your optimal model. Makes sense, right? You're aligning your talent and your timelines to match this model. And you're doing this constantly in a way that's transparent. All the while, your teams, right, who should not necessarily be terribly involved in this, they can help you size work, that sort of a thing. They're down here doing their deal, right? They're pulling stuff from the backlog. Project teams are executing, right? But they're coordinating against a roadmap that's already been optimized and aligned with executive coordination. All right, so let me pop out of here and talk about sizing work real quick. We're going to dive into so this is a typical portfolio of work that you might see, right? Typical Gantt chart here. We'll let's pop in here and look at. Pick one of these. I'm going to look at Barcelona. Okay, we'll open that. Okay, this gives us a good view of sort of that first step in the SMART process, right? Size, model, align, right? And do it transparency. That's what we call the SMART planning process. It's all about aligning your capacity. You want to make sure that you're able to take teams of totally different velocities, put them on a common timeline with named resources, with generic resources. I'm just requesting a generic cybersecurity engineer down here, right? And do it easily. If you don't make this easy for people, you're never going to get the data that you need into the what if modeling tool so that you can sequence your work correctly. This is not a difficult drill. You just come in here. You can do this by day, week, month. I typically start by a project. kind of a level and say, hey, from an FTE percentage or a percentage team perspective or hours or story points, right? This is what I need for the whole project. And then you break it down into something that's a little more useful to say, well, how do we spread this out over time, right? Um, and anywhere where you see red here, you've got over allocations, right? Either your people or your team are over allocated. And that's what you want to try to drive out of your system, right? Or any over allocations. And so, this is all drag and drop, right? We designed this interface to look just like Excel, super easy to use and adopt. That's super important for people. The other part of the sizing exercise, right? Besides coming in here, if I'm an Epic owner or a project manager, I'm out visiting with the resource managers, release train engineers, product owners, right? That these organizations that own these resources saying, okay, here's basically the scope of this effort. Not who do you need, but what skills do I need, right? You want to do this by team and by role. And then as it gets closer to executing, then you start to replace these generic people with actually named people, right? Or teams, if you're talking about integrating agile teams and shared services resources on a project. The other piece of this that's really critical is to make sure that you're aligning certain portfolio planning attributes. You guys decide what these attributes are, right? Give me a strategic theme. You know, is this primarily risk mitigation? Look, maybe it's doing both. Maybe it's reducing cost and reducing risk. Let's just drive one of these, right? Is it revenue growth? What are some of these things? What portfolio happens to be sponsoring this? Is it an epic or is it a project, right? Is it an enabler? It gives us a feel for what kind of governance and oversight that we can expect. You can have as many of these or as few of these as you want. I recommend at least 3 or 4, because when you're talking about presenting to executives, they want to see what's coming in the pipeline, right? They want to be able to see, and your what if analysis is going to be able to show them, you know, how much money over the next year are we going to be spending, or do we plan to spend on revenue growth initiatives, ops initiatives, right? Those kinds of things. How much by portfolio, whatever your portfolio tracking attributes might be, right? You need to be able to make sure that you're conveying that in a way that's easily consumed, by your executives. This can be life-changing for them when they start to see, for example, wow, we are spending way too much money on cost reduction exercises or risk mitigation exercises, right? I thought we were trying to drive revenue, right? That sort of a thing. All right, so you've gone through, you've sized your work here, and imagine, if you will, you've got your Epic owners, your product owners, who's ever doing this drill, they all start doing this, right? Everybody starts doing this, and what you end up with is then a nice full, and now I'm into actually one of the models here that I've created. What you end up with is a series of epics and projects, right? This is a typical portfolio. And again, we have clients of all size here. We have clients with 30 projects, and we have clients with hundreds or thousands of projects. And the principles are the same here, right? So you've got work that you're considering doing here, proposals that are in gray. You've got actual in-flight work in blue. And then down below, you've got your roles, right? Your skills, if you will, whether they're agile teams or whatever they may be. It's not uncommon for me to find anywhere from 20 to 150 different roles here. And the benefit of sizing your work is that you're doing it on a relative timeline, which means that if I come in here and I see an organization like compliance, or let's go pick on engineering shared services. They're always the nemesis, right, of IT delivery. I can see that my automation engineers are completely overworked in June, right? Now, hopefully, I'm having this discussion in March, where I've got enough lead time to where I can start to make some of these changes without necessarily having to push work. Pushing work is always a strategy, right? And maybe you have to do that, but if you're going to push work, let's push the right work. Okay. So you can see what's driving that over allocation. It's these three efforts, if you will. You can see the percentage that they're taking of this 154%, if you will. And the nice thing is you get to choose, you know, what criteria that you're viewing here. In this case, I don't really want to push my high priority work, but Indigo is a project that's medium priority. It probably makes sense for me to push that. And look, it's not just the automation engineers. My DevOps engineers are impacted, over allocated as well. So let's start by pushing Indigo here. What happens when we slide this out? And you see in real time, you get interactive feedback. So wow, okay, well that's a great way to push the load here. It's a medium project. Maybe we want to consider doing that. All of these changes that we're making get logged here in this history log. So you can go back and change them, roll back certain ones, leave certain ones, but it's a great way for you to start the conversation. You can look at the deltas, if you will. We're just going to look at the changed rows here. And you can see something interesting. Look, as it turns out, and this is always the way that it is, it's not just engineering shared services, that are getting impacted. It's people in the PMO, it's the training organization, it's the data analytics art, because all these people are on your project, right? I mean, projects rarely are run just by one or two skill sets. I would typically, for some of my larger projects, tend to run between 8 and 20 unique skill sets that we're working on my project at any given time. It depends on the nature of your work, but the nice thing is you get to see here before and after, what the allocations are by moving that. And you can come in here and see, well, I actually shifted that essentially by about 3 months, right? So let's go with that. Let's keep sort of plowing down here through the organization and see where else we may have challenges besides just engineering shared services. One of the things I wanted to point out was from an agile perspective. I have some people that I talk to that feel very strongly that you should only plan your work at an art level. For those of you that aren't familiar with Scaled Agile, it's basically at a team of teams level. I would disagree with that because you can see here that you're looking pretty decent in terms of your allocation overall at an art level. But if you dig just one level underneath there, you've got certain teams that are just being clobbered down here, right? And so let's take a look at one of these. Again, going through the same drill that we did before, the fact that you've got this team 200% over allocated means that you're early in the planning process. Hopefully, either that or you're just like totally off the rails in terms of how you're doing agile planning. But looking at these are the kinds of big rocks that you want to push out of the way. Again, same kind of thing. Let's look at Odyssey. What happens if we take Odyssey and push it out? And you get to see, oh, we're getting some positive change here, but not a lot, right? What else can we push here? Because this team's not going to be able to do 170% of their work. Well, we're seeing, I can't push my KTLO. That's critical, to the business. These are top 10 initiatives. I'm not going to push those. I've got, a couple of high ones here. Let's look at Quicksilver. And do I have to push that entire initiative? We have the opportunity to come in here, depending on how you size this project, and actually look at some of the features or tasks, right? And move them one at a time without essentially moving the entire project. Now, this involves communication with the project manager, the epic owner, product management, right? But let's assume that we can keep everything else on track and slide this, and you can see, oh yeah, we're actually making a real impact here, right? And again, if we go back and look at the deltas, it's interesting because sometimes you would think that pushing work always like makes things better. But these little arrows over here will show you sometimes you actually make things worse for teams, right? Um, the down arrow shows that you're reducing capacity load. The up arrow shows that at least in one of these time frames, you're actually increasing capacity load. And so it's something to be thoughtful about here, right? You can see here in December 24, before it was 30, now it's up to 56, right? 62 jumping to 107. This kind of modeling makes this kind of analysis way easier. This is very difficult to see, virtually impossible in an Excel spreadsheet. And you've got to be able to do this holistically across the enterprise. Now, the other thing that is a use case that people typically bring to us is, I've got new work. I've got to do it, right? What happens if I want to introduce this particular effort, right, into my portfolio? The opportunity map will go out and look at all the resources that you've needed, right, and give you estimated start dates where you can start this. If you don't necessarily need people, named people, you just need roles, you can see it's recommending April 1st. If you just need the roles, you can start it 2 months earlier, right? And it'll show you, yeah, look, I've got all these various roles available across your project. Really handy to do. Again, if you have to do it and you're just going to force feed it in there anyway, just include it and then go out and look at the delta and say, okay, that's ugly. These are all the different skill sets essentially that we are going to blow away by introducing that work. We better start having discussions about which one of these work, whether it's low, medium, high priority, whatever it is, we've got to push, right? That's the advantage of working in a what if kind of scenario. A couple of other things that I think would be helpful is that you can actually come in here and add additional people, to your skill set. For example, this manufacturing art, the validation team. Sure, we've done some things out here, and you can go see exactly what we've done, but we're still like way over allocated here, and I just can't push any other work. Is it an option for me to come in here and add a contractor, for example? So very easy to come in here and say, it's a team, it's a 5-person team. I want to add one person that's, roughly 20%. We're going to do it from, looks like we start to run over in about May, right? Let's start there. And it goes through the end of November, right? So let's push this down and say, hey, let's go essentially through December. And let's bump this by 20%. I get a preview there of what it's doing in terms of helping me, right? Um, and maybe you still think that's too high. Maybe we really should be bumping it by 40%. That looks a little bit more realistic. So essentially, do I have enough lead time to bring on 2 contractors and assimilate into this team, right? When we do this, this also updates our financials, right? If you've got a budget out here, you've just added labor to your budget. You can break this down however you would like. In this particular case, I've got it broken out by portfolio. You can see that you're still under budget for the first several months of the year, but certainly for the year overall, you're over budget, right? So going back and forth, balancing between what's going on from a sequencing perspective, and then back to the budget is helpful. Another nice thing that's just incredibly helpful, again, from a finance perspective, is if we come in here and look at something like CapEx. I want to look at how much CapEx is being driven by which product or portfolio. So very easy to come in here and say, okay, my manufacturing team, let's do this from a yearly perspective so that we can give our CFO sort of a good view of what's going on. And then again, same kind of deal. When you're out here and you're moving work, right, you'll see how CapEx starts to shift into the following year. So the same thing happens when you're over here. If you're shifting work here, it's going to update the the financial take and the budgets, right? So it's a repetitive process, but this is what allows you to optimize both your resource utilization as well as your budget and financial impacts. Another thing that's super helpful along the way is how you group your work. Maybe if you're really looking at things sort of from an agile perspective, I want to look at things sort of from a Kanban state here, right? It makes sense that the things that I'm analyzing have not yet been approved, but wouldn't it be nice to be able to go to your governing body for approval? If you're talking about portfolio Kanban and saying, hey, we not only just want to stage this to be ready, but here's when we think we can actually do this work, right? If you need to be stopping work, isn't it nice to be able to easily see what percentage things are in terms of their process? If I've got work that's executing MVP, do I want to stop something that's 87% complete, or something that's just out of the gate that's only 15% complete, right? And this is why it's so helpful that we have integrations with tools like Jira, ADO, where you can just on the back end, nightly or however frequently you want it, you're pulling in status, right, from the teams that are actually delivering or providing status on a routine basis. Very easy to pull in data from other systems, and status or ranked priority, or even epic name, right, or parents, some of those planning attributes, just pull them in because you want to have a single system of record for those. Okay, one last thought then would be, you've sized your work over here, and that's really the key to enabling this kind of planning, which is how you remove the primary bottlenecks to delivery. You want to make this a continuous process, right? But even if you never used this what if you never even used it, and believe me, it's very easy to use. You can have as many what if models as you want. You can just build them out for a single product, or an entire enterprise, right? A single program. What you get out in your production environment is transparency and alignment. It comes from the sizing process. And you have the opportunity now to look at your work and slice and dice it however you would like. You can come in here by role, right? And see, here's all my compliance officers. Here's everything that Lisa's working on, right? But you get to see immediately, month over month, yikes. I'm out of compliance officers in January. It gets a little better, but then it just gets horrible up in May and June. So the real benefit of coordinated capacity planning is when you start to see that, it's not just the epic owner or the project manager that gets the benefit of this. It's everybody else, all the functional managers, the product owners, the release train engineers that get a view of their team. If you're looking at my strategy, right? Here's how my work is broken down. Everything that's related to this OKR, here's these projects. And again, it always ties back to capacity, right? And what's going on here? I only have Beverly 41% on my project, but she's red. Why is she red? It's because her functional manager has over allocated her during that time frame on other work. And so it's incredibly easy to pop in here and see, look at all the other things that she's working on. I better go have a discussion with Beverly's functional manager to make sure that she's going to be able to keep her commitments, right, to me on my particular project, if you will. So all of this, you could argue, is part of effective holistic what if planning, because as soon as you put resources onto your project, you will see, even if you have no allocation out here, like here, there's no allocation here, but you can tell they're already over allocated. It's clearly not on this effort because there's not even any allocation on this effort, right? but to know that the resources or the teams, right, and the roles, and to be able to plan them across any kind of work on any timeline, right, easily drag and drop. That's the benefit that you get from coordinated resource planning. And oh, by the way, the costs come along for the ride, right? And so the financial impacts are always being addressed as well. We also track external expenses, as I showed, in the budgeting. You get to track, your external capital expenses, whether it's professional services, hardware, software. It's always capacity that gates delivery, but you have to look at it through the lens of all the other constraints that are working in your program. Once you do that, now you're in business. You can confidently, incredibly, go talk to your executives with these nice kind of rolled up charts, and you can have any kind of chart that you want here, right? We do all kinds of fun dashboarding, from a portfolio perspective, benefits realization, quality, risk, governance, those sorts of things, right? All good. But if you're not confident in your data, right, it's a little scary. And so start by sizing your work at a high level, right? These are the best estimates that you have, and just refine it over time. The fact that you're not asking one person to do all this, you're asking your PMs to go in and update this once a month, your functional managers to go in here and update this once a month, or whatever frequency you deem to be important. It's not a heavy lift. And frankly, they're doing that somewhere anyway, probably in Excel. So, if you can get a coordinated view of this, you unlock the ability to do really full function what if capacity planning here, and then start to solve these problems months in advance in a way that's easily consumable by people. My last thought is that you should be sharing these kinds of views with everybody. Everybody should see this in your routine quarterly planning events, in your portfolio syncs. They should be seeing this. They need to understand what the impacts are of their effective or ineffective planning, and the fact that executives are making decisions off of their data, right? You can start this at a project level, at an organization level. Sure, is it great to do this enterprise-wide? Of course it is. But start where you are, grow where you're planted, right? And work out from there. All right. Happy to have further discussion on this. I hope this has seeded some questions. I've roughly finished about 38 of our 45 minutes here, so we've got 7 or 8 minutes left, Samantha, for questions. Let me
Yeah.
turn this over to you. Please feel free to reach out to myself, Greg Bailey, Samantha, anybody here at prosymmetry.com. Love to follow up this discussion with you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lloyd. Lloyd, I'm really happy that you kind of grouped everything together at the end to really summarize, that smart planning approach and focused on like, okay, how do we even get started with this? Because I think when people see the modeling, it's like, yes, that's exactly what we want to do, and then it can feel overwhelming. But as I mean, you and I, we are behind the scenes. We know that it is relatively simple to get started. So with all of that said, what is the best approach, like the easy, like how can someone get started with this? Like what is the bare minimum that they would need to really build out a model that's going to help them, make a decision?
Okay. So great question. It really all starts with sizing, right? Just to make sure that you understand who it is that you're trying to bring in, what roles that they have, and just size your work. And you'll start to see immediately where you're going to have over allocations. And don't overthink it, right? You can refine this whole process over time. You get better and better at it. I started out actually as a Tempest user close to a decade ago. And I was the only guy in the organization that was doing this. I brought Tempest in on a trial, and I highly recommend that. If anybody that's on the call here is not already using templates, just bring it in. It's a free trial, right? Within 45 days, I had a model set up, and I was talking to my executives about, I think we got some problems here, and we actually did, and it was very clarifying. And
Yeah.
uh, and so I just say start with sizing your work and don't overthink it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the key thing there is just don't overthink it. And that's that can be challenging when you want to get something right. So
That's
um
right.
we have a question here specifically about a Tempest What If functionality. Can we move just parts of the project? So I'm assuming that this question is meaning, hey, this project is in flight. We don't want to move any of the past allocations. We don't want to simulate any of that. We just want to say, hey, maybe from February 1st on, I need to understand what happens if we extend this out. Is that possible in a model today?
Yes, 100%. So you see this split capability here, right? It asks you for a date. When do you want to split the project, right? Just you know, name a portion of that, split it, and then just move that split portion forward, right? Everything else sort of stays the same, the work that you've already done. It's a great question. Yes, definitely can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's really key here too, because one of the things that um, I do want to ask about is, how early in the planning phases should we start modeling? But also at the same time, I noticed we have a lot of our current users on this webinar today too, and a lot of them are like, listen, things are already in flight. We cannot do any pre-planning, but what can I do to start planning today? Like we have things happening. I need to understand if we were to make changes to better our portfolio success rate or to make sure we're delivering specific things. I'm glad that that question was asked because we really can focus on, okay, the last month has already happened. Let's understand what moves forward, which brings me to my question, how early in that initial planning should I start modeling these projects? And I think I know what you're going to say, Lloyd, but I would love just to hear your take on that.
So let me put it in perspective again. There's no wrong time to start this, right?
Hmm.
And your user's question is also quite insightful in that they realize this is a forward-looking endeavor, right? Whatever's happened behind you is behind you. You can use that data perhaps to get a better informed forecast going forward. But we make it super easy to forecast, right? And just go forward from wherever you are. I don't care if you're right in the middle of a project. If you haven't sized it, you should size the project to the end of the project, even if it's a multi-year effort,
Yeah.
understanding that your forecasts are going to be less accurate, 9 to 12 months out than they are in the first 9 months, right? But you can gain benefit from this immediately by starting wherever you are. And it really does start with sizing and understand the fact that executives are going to criticize your data. Like that's just a given. And just say, look, what we have here is directionally correct. It's coming from our SMEs. It's the best guess, and we're going to refine it over time. But look, if we already see that we're 4 people short 9 months from now, we should at least be having the discussion about, how good are these estimates and what do we need to do to refine these estimates, right? And so really you can start wherever you are and work out from there.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, Lloyd, one last question here. And there are a few in the question area. We will be reaching out to individually answer some of those. Yes, a recording will be shared. I know there's a few questions about that, but yes, you'll get a recording, like I said, probably tomorrow. But overall, one final question about all of this. You had mentioned several times, specifically on the financial modeling, sharing those things with your CFO, understanding the impacts of the CapEx moving out or moving in or something changing. You also mentioned, taking like the model to your leadership team and really showing them we are going to have a risk here. So I think my question here is how can someone best communicate the results of a model or the results of changes to their leadership organization? Just because this is something that they probably haven't had before and something that is a new set of data to make decisions on. So how can someone really effectively communicate the results of their modeling to their leadership teams?
A couple of quick thoughts. You can easily export this to Excel or PDF, right? So the presentation part is easy, and you can expand this. Look, inherently, executives understand that resource planning is important. They also understand that without the right automation, that it's incredibly difficult, and that usually means bad data, and it's not particularly useful for them. So you're going to have to package this kind of presentation by saying, oh, look, we brought in this automation, even if it's just on trial, because it fixes those issues, right? It makes it easy and adoptable, right, for people to use. And we actually have confidence in this data now. And so those 2 points, I think, are the ones that really are going to, help you overcome any kind of resistance you get from executives. I would submit to you, executives are dying for this kind of information. They want to know, where are my people being used? Where are they being underutilized? I helped an organization, sadly, go through a 5% riff, right? And they wanted to make sure that they were not going to be riffing the wrong people, right? And a great way to do that is, well, who's out here, who's single threaded, what skills that you're so specialized, we don't dare touch these people, as opposed to these other people where they're working on low priority work, and tragically, we're going to have to sidelight them, for a while. So they're dying for this information, and I think you'll find that to be the case. But be confident when you go in, because this is the best data that you'll ever be able to give them.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Like I said, there are a few questions here. We will follow up with those questions individually by the end of the day today. So Lloyd, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And we will talk to everyone later. Have a great day.
Thanks all.